And today I promised to talk about conscious stash busting. So Mitch asked me a few days ago what the tariffs were, how they were going to impact my industry. And I said, I think it's going to be terrible. And except for some, hey, Lucinda, some local, U.S. mills. But the problem with the U.S. mills, generally speaking, they either process small batches of local fleece. They might be like Mountain Meadow wool that is relatively good sized, but so there's just limits on what they can produce. And then other local mills like Kramer Yarns, I don't know exactly where they get all of their fiber, but they do a lot of blending. And so blending is almost always bringing in imported fibers. So I know they use acrylic. Geez, I have to put my glasses on. Hey, Reen, and sorry. Glad you could join me. I think this is fairly important in terms of how our access to yarn may change. I'm thinking in large part like both Lion Brand and Universal Mills have most of their yarn made in Turkey. I think Cascade sources almost exclusively from South America. Rigo is in Uruguay. Trendsetter sources everything from Italy. Skacel gets everything from Germany. You get the picture. So local dyers, hand paint dyers who use American mills will probably be in relatively good shape. But if they've been using imported yarn, they may have troubles making the shift because the mills are already booked with people who they already spin for. So I know usually there's a fair number of Chinese and Asian mills at H&H. We'll see what happens there. Of course, that will be, I'm sure, the talk of the town. And then one of the problems from my perspective, and this is not necessarily true if you are just a purchaser of yarn, is that a lot of the hand dyers are fairly local and do not sell widely. So, I don't always know about yarns that exist in other parts of the country because they mostly market within a limited geographic area. So it's just going to be interesting to see, thinking about other folks who were coming up on H&H. It's first week in May. So people who sell buttons, knitting notions, so needles, Chiagu, I don't know where Knitter's Pride gets theirs, but if it's not made in the U.S., it's going to get more expensive. What was it yesterday? We were out shopping and Mitch asked me, he had gone into the liquor section at the grocery store to see what his favorite scotch cost there. And so he asked me what it cost, and it is from Scotland. And he asked me what I paid for it usually, and it was $10 higher. Now, that's $10 from where I usually buy it. I usually don't buy it at the grocery store. But that would be a pretty nice $10 to grab if you could. So I think we're going to see some of that, putting my glasses. So what does H&H stand for? I have no idea. But it's basically for the knitting, embroidery, sewing, needleworks market. So the trade show used to be put on by TNNA, which kind of sank amidst the pandemic, and it still exists, but it's only focused on retailers. So it's a great place, and I don't think they're doing shows. So they do local yarn store day, and I think that's pretty much what they're doing. So H&H puts on trade shows, so they don't, like TNNA was member run, which is why they folded during the pandemic. So H&H is put on by a company called Colonessi, which has put on Fiber Arts trade show. And this is all B2B in Cologne, Germany, years. And after TNNA sunk, they put on the first trade show it was either 2022 or 2023. It was very successful in terms of them breaking into a new market, but half the vendors go to the one in Cologne. So it was really nice. I had worked with TNNA and on various parts of their show during my career. And let me tell you, having something professionally run is so much better. But it's more expensive. So booths are probably about twice the cost. But the thing is that they do everything and you don't have to worry about it. The other thing that's kind of different, and this may be part of where they do the show, I don't know, but at TNNA, it was always a problem for bringing in your freight. And it was super expensive because you just basically had to pay like $50 an hour for the guys to move your stuff in, unless you were like me and I would just bring it in armloads. But a lot bigger vendors, and what's the word I'm looking for? So expensive. Reen says, yeah, to have things brought in. And so, you send a big crate of things, and it's got to be forklifted into your space. So it's pretty expensive. I've always been small enough that I could just, hump my own stuff in. And you could do it from your car if you didn't have something that had to be forklifted. So, lots of trips. They never had any air conditioning on convention hall, so setting up was always horrid. And I am going to have a booth this year. It's a half-size booth in the Indie Untangled Pavilion, and it's for super small businesses like me or people who have never done a trade show before. And so I'm going to talk about my pattern tailor and sizing and inclusion and hope to survive. They're always pretty hard on me because I'm an introvert and you just have to talk and then you're rejected by people who don't think your product is sexy enough. And so it's kind of a roller coaster. But I've got a really cute booth design and I've been pulling things together for weeks. So hopefully I'll be ready. I fly Chicago Tuesday and then I'll set up my booth on Wednesday. The show is Thursday and Friday. So back to, it's really hard to sell things as an introvert. This is true. But I've really been working on it and working on my pitch. And for me, it's more about being able to introduce people than selling. So I don't have to actually sell anything at the show. I just have to demo things. And then I'll be doing, I think, 5 half-hour quickie little workshops in the Indian Tangled Pavilion over the course of the 2 days because they asked if I would, and I said yes. And so it's mostly, short, fun things that I can talk to retailers and designers and whoever needs to rest their feet. So I'm debating whether I should take cookies. You can tell me. I make excellent cookies. So promised that I would tell my story about the vet and my fat cat. So, as you know, my stories always require a little something. So, this does end up tying into tariffs and building your stash and using your stash. So, I had this cat, which I inherited from my younger sister who lived with me while the first couple of years she was in college. And she rescued this cat and immediately lost interest when she found a boyfriend. So, I ended up with this cat named Huey and pick the cookies. I loved this cat and really doted on him. And I was going to design school and, just needed something to care about. And so I would go down to Fred Meyer, which is, kind of like a Walmart, everything under one roof. And I would buy lengths of different print ribbon, and Huey indulged me by wearing a ribbon every day. So I had a collection of ribbons that I would dress him in, and he was adorable. And he was a brown tabby, just, with white under his chin, just a regular guy. And when I went off to work every day, he would go around the neighborhood, and he started getting fatter. And one day I was like, I'm going to follow him and figure out where he goes. And I'd come home earlier was not at work for some reason. And, he had a regular route through the neighborhood, and he was going to a couple of old ladies, and they were feeding him. And, so he ate at my house and then went across the street and down the alley and ate at first old lady's house and then the second old lady's house. And then one of the younger neighbors got a cat, and he would go steal his food. So he was getting super fat. He was like a regular sized cat and ended up weighing like 22 pounds. And so I knock on the door of the first lady and I'm like, he's got a home and I feed him. And she's like, oh, well, he's so cute. And, he always meows like he hasn't been fed. I'm like, the cat wears a plaid ribbon around his neck. This is a cat who is well cared for. And so I'm not sure I ever convinced her not feed him. But, and I was concerned. And so when he went to the vet, I was like, God, he's so fat, but don't want to put him on a diet. And plus that, he just goes around and eats other places. And the vet was like, well, let's just see, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. And she said, I'm always nervous about telling people not to feed, to not let their cats get a little extra weight because they can get trapped someplace and they can not have access to food for days. Well, I thought she was crazy, but I didn't want to put him on a diet. So fast forward, Huey has a run-in with a car. He's gone for 3 weeks. I have no idea where he is. And he shows up after 3 weeks at the cat door, and he's obviously in intense pain, and he's got what turned out to be a shattered front leg. Well, he weighed like 7 pounds when he got back. So he had been someplace and had no access to food. So long story short, it does make sense to have some backup. I don't recommend as much as Huey had, but so he ended up having multiple surgeries on his leg. We ended up having to leave a pin in his kitty elbow because every time he jumped, he broke it again. And so he ran and walked with his leg held up at his side, but he was fine and got fat again. But then finally died. This is horrible, of coronary disease. So I was very sad when he died. I've never had another cat. So another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about your stash is Mitch's famous last words, which were, it seems that you never have the right yarn in your stash when you're looking to start a new project. And when he said that to me, I realized that it was absolutely true and quit yarn that I didn't have, pretty clear intentions for. I also, about that time, I had been designing, but I didn't have a business that did anything else. And so around 2000, my sister and I started a business. We ended up selling yarn. So then I felt like I couldn't use yarn from my stash. I had to sell or use what we were selling. So, or yarn that was provided to me for designs. So, but Mitch is right. You rarely have the right thing. Amen. This is so true for me, says Lucinda. And so I don't have a huge stash. I do have some yarn that I purchased in New York in like 2002, which I've never done anything more than swatch with. I've got a ton of it. It was really cheap. But mostly I end up getting rid of things that I acquire. So I'm very cautious. However, yarn companies give me yarn. And so have a fair amount of yarn. We can walk over to my yarn shelves here and get a few things out of the way. You can see I have yarn. So it's not like I'm pointing fingers at people who acquire yarn. I wonder what that is. I'm always finding things over in corners that I've forgotten about. And I have little yarn over here. And then there's yarn that I'm actively working with, which is usually in my knitting box in the living room. So I like to keep it to what feels like is doable within 2 or 3 years. It's not really, but I try and keep it down. I always offer to pay companies to ship to me because I'd rather not, like at H&H, they will say, take yarn, and I try not to do that too much. So I'll take new things that I'm not familiar with, but I try not to take too much because it does end up becoming a burden that I have to design something with it or I have to feel guilty. So I do have some yarn that I probably procured from yarn companies, and I don't feel bad about having that because I use it. And I was just given quantities, and so I put, it's mostly from Anzula. I pull up that a lot when I need to do something. But and then I've got like my buttons and my beads, which I have way more than I need. But as a designer, I like having options. So one of the things that I said in my brief post about this is that when you aren't buying, business is suffering. So, and this is going to be true across our economics. If I don't buy at the grocery store, they are taking a hit. If you don't buy yarn, your local yarn shop is suffering, or your online vendor, wherever you get it. So it's a conundrum because right now probably people have a lot of yarn in their stash, and it is going to be very tempting just work on that, and nothing wrong with just working on your stash yarn. But you should be aware that somebody is not making a sale because of that. So I'm calling it conscious stash busting, which is that, you may not have exactly what you need. So go out and buy that one more skein that you need, or, the new set of needles, or that other thing, because that yarn shop needs the business. And, you may be able to enhance your stash yarn by adding to it. Oh, Rena's been moaning about how much yarn she bought. She bought too much. I think I made a lot of indie dyers really happy. Yeah, so there is that. Those feel good. So this is kind of funny. When I lived in San Francisco, a gal worked for me who lived in my neighborhood, but I lived up on the hill and she lived at the bottom of the hill. And so she was close to like local grocery stores, which I wasn't. And she did my bookkeeping. So she was always like really impressed at how I shopped in the neighborhood and really made an effort to support local shops. So when we said we were going to move up here, she was like, a lot of local shops are going to be really sad when you're gone because they probably don't even notice, but you're spending a fair amount of money every month sprinkled around the neighborhood. And it's true. I do the same thing here. I shop at a local chain grocery store. I go to a local butcher, the gal down the street with the dry cleaner. I go to her. I get my hair done by a friend, so she's getting my money. I just try and keep it as local as I can. I'm right now trying to wean myself off of Amazon. And so this relating to both H&H and using what you have. English wool yarn. I needed yarn like a hole in the head. Oh, somebody says yesterday I received. Yeah, so sometimes we just need that lift, and it probably gives you more pleasure than buying a new pair of shoes or whatever your thing is, to be buying something that you are going to be creative with, because you get the satisfaction of the purchase. You get the satisfaction of like looking at it until you decide what to do with it. Then you get the satisfaction using it, and hopefully the satisfaction of the final project. So this is what Mitch, who's our money man, always says. He's like, I don't know why guys don't like give their wives yarn, because it's the kind of thing that she loves you when you give it to her. She enjoys it and loves you while she's working with it, and then loves you because she's got this great looking sweater that she made that she gets compliments on. There is a lot of satisfaction to be gotten from our yarn, and we should not deprive ourselves of, let's say, refreshing what we own so that we can get excited about it again. However, from what I understand of economics, it's not good to have a lot of sunk costs in something that you may not use. And like if you're precarious financially, it's not good to use up your ready assets on something that you're not going to use right away. Better to feed yourself. And this said by somebody who went without many meals in order to own fabulous shoes. So, it's always a balancing act. Personally, I would not step down in the quality of the yarn that I was buying because, again, I feel like I'm looking for a skein of yarn that looks sexy. Oh, here's one. So this is Wash My Lace from Anzula. I adore the color. I also like working with lace weight yarn. And what was I talking about? I got distracted and I forgot. Oh, so what this probably costs right now, like $37 to $40 for a skein. You do get, it's 100% superwash, and there's 980 yards in it, so there's a lot of knitting in here. And so I always think about other things that you might spend $40 on. Like if Mitch and I go to the movies, it's like $32, $3 for movie tickets. And then if we get candy, that's another $8. So there's $40. Yeah, isn't that a great color? I was looking through my color magazine at lunch today. I'm happy to see a lot of that green that I love is coming up for 2026. So this is not just $40. 980 yards. It takes me a lot longer to knit lace weight than it does heavier yarns or, like DK. So, this is untold hours of knitting pleasure. Let's say 15. That movie I went to lasted an hour and a half. So, there is a lot of value in this, even though it's fairly expensive outlay. So think carefully about how you're using your dollars, but don't deprive yourself. I know I wrote about how I could tell by what my mom was cooking hours of entertainment. Reen says, yeah, just like planning a project for me is hours of entertainment. And then, there's all the knitting and just the pleasure of the yarn running through my hands. So, we always said, oh, Mom's making beans. It was really bad when she got to the green peppers, which I said I loathe. And so fortunately, I do love soups. And we ate a lot of soup for dinner when we were poor. And, so think about ways that you can stretch things. And, I'm always using up little bits that are left. This yarn here is from a project. It's another lace weight. It's called Breeze, and it's silk and linen, I think. No, maybe it's just silk. Anyhow, I love this yarn. Hard to get rid of one of these. I've made so many things. I've got 3 different colors, and it's like getting rid of mohair. How do you get rid of mohair? It just goes forever. So just entertain yourself with what you can do. Plan more than one project with a yarn and have some fun. So it's hard to do with hand paints because you can't just buy a little bit because you got to buy the whole freaking skein. But when I was years ago in this business, there wasn't a lot of hand-painted yarn. And so you mostly bought skeins of things or balls of things. And I would always just buy one. And I would sometimes just buy, like the yellow or whatever that they are never going to sell anyhow, because I don't care what color I'm using when I'm designing. And then I would go back and buy yarn once I'd figured out what I was going to do with the yarn and like what kind of quantity I was going to need. But that's hard to do with hand-dyed yarns. It's always a danger to buy one-of-a-kind or limited quantity yarns, because unless you are clever about using them, they can just be a problem in your stash. And so I still haven't gotten back to the sleeve caps on this, but there are 3 yarns in here. And so the multicolor is from Oink Pigments, and there's a solid green. It's like this, but it's green. So it's called Dottie. It's from Anzula. And then the other yarn is Milky Way from Anzula. There's a lot of yardage in here too. Let's see, what is it? 500 yards. These are hard to get rid of. So This is a project that I basically put together to challenge myself to use that one skein, which was a sample. It was not something that they were going to have more of, or, by the time I got it, it wouldn't be the same. And I wanted a garment out of it. So pulled in the dotty, which was left over from another project. And I had a couple skeins of the Milky Way. I've used like a quarter of one in this project, maybe a third. So get creative. Use having restrictions as something to have fun with. So I was thinking about Reen's recent purchase, and I was trying to think of this gal's name. I can't recall what it was today. She was a fabulous knitter who used to come to our retreats. So she and her husband had one child and boy who was a musician. She had been a musician. I think her husband may have been a musician too, or gone to school as musicians. I think they both worked as computer programmers. Her name is just like on the tip of my tongue. So she had this fabulous studio in their home and just had bins of yarn and fabric and everything. And Gina, that was her name, Gina, always was working on multiple projects at once. So she had everything like in the bin with the information about, how much yarn, where she bought it, all of that, and what she planned to do with it, which didn't mean that she couldn't change her mind, but meant that she had given some intention to that yarn. And she did the same when she bought fabric. So that's labeling can be a good thing. I actually loved my stash the most when we lived in this like 1,100 square foot flat in San Francisco. If you've ever wondered what the difference between an apartment and a flat has its own entrance and an apartment has a common entrance. So even it's something, like a condo, it's still called an apartment if it doesn't have its own entrance. So like we live in townhouses and they each have their own entrance. So they're condos, but they would be apartments rather than they would be flats rather than apartments. And flats is a term that they use in San Francisco. So we lived in this Victorian flat and can't really read. I think there were 22 stairs because we were on the third floor and we had no room. I mean, we were just stuffed in there. And so I had all of my yarn that I kept on the premises in bins that were labeled so I could see them from my desk. And I mean, I had like dining room chairs piled in my closet. It was chaos. But I had this, which was really organized. And then when we had moved to San Francisco, I had gotten rid of a lot of my stash. And what I kept, I had put into a spreadsheet, and all of the boxes were numbered. So if I went to my storage locker, I could find them. And I felt really good because I knew exactly what everything was. And I could look at my list. I do have a good memory and see what I had and whether I needed to make a trip to my storage locker. So anybody have any economic questions for me? So keep buying yarn. Be careful if you need to financially. I think we all will, but as Reen said, remember you'll make somebody really happy when they make the sale. So H&H is in 3 weeks, I think, May 7th and 8th. And so I'll probably do a live from there to tell you what I've learned, although there's a bash Friday night, so I'm sure I'll learn more there when people have a cocktail in their hands. But I will keep you guys posted. I will try and do some videos, some short videos to let you see what's going on there. It's always fun. It'll be interesting to see if people have dropped out. It was had grown significantly. So, and then there are classes and they do education. It's all B2. And then, what was I going to say? So education for designers, content creators, retail shops, that sort of thing. I'm going to none of it. I go to the keynote speakers, and which are usually pretty interesting, and I didn't even see any classes I was interested in. So I had a very productive week. I created, I think, 3 new calculators for the pattern tailor. However, now I'm mopping up things that I realized I did wrong. So that's both exciting and enervating. And it turns out, there are things that Jamie forgot to tell me, or I wasn't listening. So now I'm going back through our meeting notes to try and find answers. I'd forgotten about like how you plug anchors into a document online. And fortunately, there was just a little note in one of our meeting notes. So I've been able to glean some stuff there. And Owen, my PHP guy, has saved my butt a couple of times. Got really excited because I was able to figure out problems. So that's like a whole nother session. I'm going to do that next week, Reen. But so the pattern tailor is invented by Jill Wolcott. And so when I say I'm making calculators, I'm making things that will calculate how much, so I have this partial ball of yarn, and that particular calculator is called the yarn remainder finder. So I will put this on the scale, find out how much it weighs, and then based on the label information, I'll figure out how much I have left based on the weight. So that's a calculator that you can get, like this, same thing. I have no idea what there actually is. I do actually, because I've weighed it. So they're free, but they're calculators. I know a lot of knitters don't like to do the math, and I love to do it, and I love to come up with these little tools. So the ones that I created this week are all free. So one is called Time to Knit, and that will help you figure out, based on doing a timed test, how long it would take you to make a project or a section of a project. Another one is for the long tail cast on, and it tells you what information to input into it and how to do it so that you can calculate how much yarn you need for your long tail. And then my favorite cast on is called the flexible long tail cast on, and it uses even more yarn than the long tail. So you can calculate the length of your yarn tail that you're going to need. And I found it really quite fun to do. And I came up with this whole system for doing it. So I create these calculators. They're free, but they have to be purchased. So you have to go through the shop because the pattern tailor only works in the shop. So the pattern tailor works with spreadsheets that I create that I then upload. They're programmed using JSON language, which is very simple, and Excel formulas. And then they create an output sheet. I'm looking around to see if I have one close by, which gives you not only the information that you input, because I figure anytime you have to amass information, you might as well keep it. And then the outputs that you need. So that's all free. You can, when you download, you get a printable version and a version for your device, so you can save it on your computer or on your phone and have it for future reference. And then I have some cowls, which I started with cowls because, so this Berkshire's is in the pattern tailor, and it tells you how much yarn you're going to need of each of the colors based on your swatch. And then you can use like the time to knit. I've been doing little tests with it. So I'm working on another version of this right now. And I did a time test, and it took me 14 minutes and 38 seconds to do 4 rows of 100 rounds of 100 stitches in this stitch pattern. So I plugged that information in and also ask you, so what's the area that you're knitting? What's the length? Because you've already told it how many stitches you have. So I gave it the depth that I want for my cowl, and based on my timed test, it will tell me how much time. I think we're at 3.75 hours, so 3 hours and 45 minutes, based on my row gauge and how deep that is. So I was thinking today, well, you could combine like the time test and and then I'm working on one for how much yarn you're consuming in every row or round. So to me, those are just really fun. So they allow you to take my pattern and make things in any gauge with any measurements within whatever the parameters I've put in for the particular design. So I've only got cowls right now. I have a top that we did, but it became so complicated that it's only for DK yarn, I think. We worked on it for 8 months. It was huge. Oh, and then I have the horizontal bust start calculator. So right now I just have the pullover version on my website. And since I'm finding all these things that I have to fix, I'm glad I haven't posted all the other versions of some of these things that I have. So it will calculate the depth of the dart that you need based on 4 measurements, and it will tell you based on your stitch gauge and your row gauge how many times you need to work short rows to get the depth of the dart that you need. And it's got written instructions, so you can take it and plug it into anything you're working, and it will accommodate the pattern that you're working, and to the extent possible the number of rows in a pattern repeat. So the goal is that you want to finish your dart to begin the next row of where you were when you started your dart. So let's say you ended on row 4 and the next row is row 1. Well, you're going to work rows in short rows, and then when you pick up, you want it to be the next consecutive row, so that over the stitches that were not short rowed, you're coming out in pattern. And so that's what I do with my time. And of course, every design has the potential to go in there, so I get really excited. And I actually love building the workbooks, but then when it comes to all the details, I am not a detail gal. So I've been creating lists so I can check things off, and which is helpful, but then there are all these things I forget. So we're adding those to the list, and it's quite daunting to get one of these up just because of the level of documentation. You have to have a user guide. You have to have, for these little calculators, I just do an output sheet and a user guide and the workbook. So for a pattern, I do output, user guide, pattern accelerator, which is just gets you through the first steps and getting through the pattern tailor, which, it's a computer, so it's stupid. You have to do it the way it wants. And then the written pattern, which also has charts in it. And then all of the preamble stuff, which if you look at Berkshire's cowl, all of that is free. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm making the pattern shorter, putting all this other stuff up so you can get the schematic and the techniques and the swatching information, because I just want people to have access to usable information when they're knitting. I think it's why we get hung up and why projects get put aside. So anyhow, I can and will talk about this more next week. I'm pretty freaking proud of it, but I haven't done a lot of marketing yet, so I've been focusing on getting ready for H&H, and then I will do a push of marketing this summer. As you know, I hate marketing, and I'm not that good at it, but we're trying to change that. So it's 5:07. I have not heard from Mitch whether he's doing, it sounds like he is doing a music hour. We're going out to a bar to see a group that we really like tonight, and I don't have to cook dinner. So we will have a shortened music hour. Have a good weekend. I hope everybody's getting wonderful weather, or at least that things are blooming and trees are budding and all of that, because it does make me feel better. I think I'll call this week a wrap. Thanks for coming.